sugars. I'm just giving you a heads up that my signature program, Queen Out, is about to close its doors and the 50% discount will be ending in 2 days. This epic online course will never be offered at this price again. So if you want to snag yourself a bargain and completely transform your sex life so that you can have more pleasure and confidence in the bedroom, well, now's the time. I'm going to pop the link and the discount code in the show notes so that you can get it for half price, but you've only got until the end of tomorrow. So this episode will air on a Monday. You've got the end of Tuesday to grab it. So I hope to see you in there.
This program is brought to you by Pussy Magnets.
Put a midge on your fridge with a pussy magnet.
Welcome, my lovely lumps. Or should I say lovely labs? I'm so thrilled to have you here in the Labia Lounge to yarn about all things sexuality, womanhood, holistic health, and everything in between. Your legs. Can never help myself. Anyway, we're going to have vag loads of real chats with real people about real shit. So buckle up. You're about to receive the sex ed that you never had and have a bloody good laugh while you're at it. Before we get stuck in, I'd like to respectfully acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm recording this, the Menang people. It's an absolute privilege to be living and creating dope podcast content on Noongar country, and I pay respect to their elders past, present, and emerging. Now, if you're all ready, let's flap and do this. Oh God, is there such thing as too many vagina jokes in the one intro? Whatever, I'm leaving it in. It's my podcast.
Don't panic, you're not broken. Your sex education was a piece of shit. Get your flaps out and pull up the couch. It's the Labia Lounge.
Hey, labial loves, what's happening? I really would love you to get comfy because today we're going to be covering a topic that often makes people uncomfy. And we're going to be talking about STIs. I've got Jordan Donnell with me today to dive into what's up with all manner of STI trivia. And I'm sure I'm going to learn a few things that I didn't know either about all of that with her today. So to introduce my beautiful guest, Jordan is a physician associate, women's sexual health educator, intimacy coach, and speaker. She's the founder of the Vaginas, Vulvas, and Vibrators podcast, which I'll be going on with her soon as well. Fabulous name. And her goal is to raise awareness about conditions, sexuality, sexual intimacy, and relationships that specifically affect women. She wants to help normalize women's health and create a safe space for women to feel validated, which is just such a noble quest. So this little collab feels very aligned because we share that same mission of normalizing and destigmatizing and validating women's experiences. So welcome to the lounge, Jordan. Happy to have you.
Yes, thank you so much for having me today.
So just to launch straight in, first things first, I want to chat about what is the definition of an STI? And I know it's a little bit basic, probably most of us know, but just so we're all on the same page before we launch into the specifics, can you just tell us what is an STI?
Yeah, an STI is going to be a sexually transmitted infection. So a infection that is transmitted through sexual activity, kind of self-explanatory. There are viruses, there are also bacteria, and there are parasites that are all sexually transmitted infections.
Whoa, I did not know about the parasite thing. Oh my goodness. Okay, so can you reel off maybe some of the most common STIs for us? And then I'm definitely going to ask you about that parasite one.
Yes. So most common ones are going to be gonorrhea, chlamydia, HIV, herpes or HSV, and a couple of other. Trichomonas is going to be the one that is caused by parasites. And you have HPV, human papillomavirus, the most common cause for cervical cancer. And also hepatitis C is sexually transmitted as well.
Okay, cool. And what can you tell us about this sort of new kid on the block, or at least something that's being labeled a new STI? Can you talk to us about mycoplasma?
Yes, mycoplasma and ureaplasma are these newer STIs that here in the US, which is where I practice in and where I'm from, about 2015 is when they really were first identified as an infectious disease or a sexually transmitted infection. And kind of getting some more steam. They're not commonly screened for here in the States. I don't know. Do you guys have common testing for that there?
I am not aware of it, but we might. I'm definitely not the authority on this topic, but I had never heard of it. No.
Yeah. And I find that a lot of providers actually are not aware of this as well, and that it's that new. Some symptoms that you see with mycoplasm or ureaplasm are going to typically be no symptoms, like most of our STIs. You have no symptom unless you're tested or screened. Sometimes you will see like discharge or itching or odor associated, but usually it's asymptomatic.
Oh gosh. So then what kind of damage does it do if we don't catch it? Like if it has no symptoms, is it sort of like bubbling away under the surface, causing havoc in our systems?
Yeah. So mycoplasm, just like other STIs, can lead to pelvic inflammatory disease, which is going to be kind of like fevers, pelvic pain, tenderness with intercourse, or even pelvic exam, and can cause long-term complications as well from pelvic inflammatory disease.
Okay, interesting. So, I mean, that's a bit of a scary one since they're not routinely testing for it and it has no symptoms. Do we need to just ask for that test to be done specifically? Like go into the office armed with like, okay, I want this tested for and da 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 da.
Yeah, you do. And a lot of STIs are asymptomatic unless you're having routine testing. And on top of that, there's only a handful that are routinely tested for. So the most common ones screened for here in the States is going to be gonorrhea, chlamydia, syphilis, and HIV. Those are like the 4 that are typically tested. But as you know, we listed a handful of other ones that are not commonly tested for. And so you have to ask your provider to test these specific conditions in order to get that done.
Okay. Any chance that there's like somewhere where there's a list that we can actually print out or write down and then take in with us?
Yes, I do have a list, and I can give you the link for that for the show notes for patients or for women to take to their doctors with the different conditions to ask to be tested for. Absolutely. And it also gives you some other questions that you may want to bring up with your provider as well.
Yeah, amazing. Such a good resource. Great. So, all right, I'm thinking like, I mean, I had a few listeners send in questions about this topic, and a lot of them were kind of around, so what are the symptoms? But if there aren't any symptoms, how do I know? Like, how do I know if there's, because some people are like, oh, sometimes I think I've got thrush or BV, or there's just some kind of imbalance, like it doesn't quite feel right. There's something going on, but it's tricky to actually tell, like, when should we be going and getting tested? Are there any, like with any of these STIs, are there any symptoms at all that could, or just telltale signs?
Yeah. So things to look for STIs in particular are going to be vaginal discharge changes. So color changes, amount changes, frequency of like how much discharge you're having, and odor. Some other things to pay attention to would be like maybe itching or pain with intercourse, pain with urination, any changes. Those are things that should make you go, something isn't right. You brought up BV and yeast infections. Those are not STIs. Those are other infections. They fall under the category of vaginitis, which is a vaginal infection, but it's not sexually transmitted. With BV or bacterial vaginosis, that is going to be something that you usually see like a fishy odor, can be kind of some itching or some tenderness to your vulva. And a lot of times more discharge is produced than usual. And with a yeast infection, that's typically going to be more of like a cottage cheese like discharge, which will change your opinion of cottage cheese in the future. But that white, thick, chunky type discharge, sometimes associated with that itching as well and that irritation to the vulva.
Yeah, great. Thanks for clarifying that. There's actually, if you're interested in learning more, everybody, I've got an episode that's specifically around vaginal infections, BV and thrush and what am I saying? UTIs, not STIs. Goddamn. Yeah, so you can jump on. It's a past episode with Joanna McMeekin, who's a Chinese medicine doctor. I think I've got one with a naturopath as well. So we've covered those sort of like more common vaginal infections if you're interested in learning more about those. So when it comes to STIs, though, get my words right. What are the things that you like commonly find yourself educating people on, Jordan?
I think the biggest thing is when to get tested and asking for the appropriate tests. So if you are sexually active, if you are in a monogamous relationship, still would recommend yearly screening. If you're in a non-monogamous relationship, would recommend more frequent testing. It depends. Some people are going to choose to do like annually, so every 3 to 4 months. Some people will choose to do every 6 months, sometimes every year. It depends, between your partners would encourage doing testing and having conversations about when is the last time you got tested and what were the results and how many partners have you had since then? Have you been using condoms or not? And asking those things of your partners.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, I actually just came to mind. I did an episode with Danelle from Cervical Wellness about HPV because I have an ongoing HPV infection, which has caused cervical dysplasia. And it was interesting to discover that, my partner and I could have been passing it back and forth between us, which is why, even though I'm in a monogamous relationship, blah, 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 I just haven't been able to kick it. Because even though I've been doing all the right things and trying really hard, like we may have been passing it back and forth between us, and you actually can't, there are no like symptoms. You can't really like tell if the male has it. So anyway, it's just an interesting side note, but I'm wondering like yeah.
There's no testing for HPV for men.
Yeah.
Or no routine testing. It is available in the States. We have anal testing and throat testing for HPV, but you're not going to find that readily available at most providers' offices. You're probably going to have to go to a sex positive place like Planned Parenthood or some other types of community resources for that type of specific testing.
Totally. Yeah. And, we just haven't had access to that really specific testing for him. So we've kind of been just playing it safe and using condoms. Actually, Johnny Condoms, which is this really amazing ethical condom brand, sponsored me and sent me a bunch of free condoms so that we can be using those while I'm trying to heal my cervical dysplasia. It's just a peak career moment when someone sends me free condoms so that I can
Always love that.
So yeah, speaking of testing, that was what I wanted to ask next is like, I know that some routine ones you can do with like a urine test, some like, herpes, you need to do a blood test. Like what sort of tests are we going to need to get for each one or, to do a thorough panel?
Yeah. So to do a thorough panel, you're going to want blood and then either a urine or a vaginal swab if you are somebody with a vagina. If you are a male or somebody with a penis, then it would just be a urine swab or like a urine culture that they would collect some of that for testing.
Gotcha.
And with the blood, you're able to look for HIV, syphilis, HPV, HIV, syphilis, HSV, and hepatitis C. With the swab, you're able to do gonorrhea, chlamydia, trichomonas, and also mycoplasma and ureaplasm, if that is one that they're being tested for as well.
Okay. Yep. Great. That's going to be, that list that you've got, such a good resource because I used to just go and I'd just assume the doctors kind of had my back and just would obviously test. They're like, do you want me to do, an STI test? I'm like, yeah, definitely. And then I found out they only tested for like 3 of the main ones with that. And if I wanted the more specific, one, I had to do bloods, I had to do other things. And I was like, why? They just didn't even like tell me, So that's really useful. And it's nice to go in there armed with a bit of knowledge and, a bit of a checklist and then just really insist on it as well.
And it helps you feel so empowered when you're having these conversations with your providers to know what you should be asking, or to have a little bit of background information so that you feel more confident walking in there asking for what you need.
Exactly. And then, they're less likely to be dismissive or just kind of want to get you in and out. I mean, it totally depends on what sort of doctor you go to. And, I used to go to this bulk billing clinic that just literally probably set aside 10-minute slots for each patient, and they just wanted to get you in and out, and they barely even made eye contact with you. And, you really had to assert yourself if you wanted to be listened to and to have a proper conversation and ask questions and get answers about what they were doing. And, so that's really cool. So let's talk about risk factors. I know, certain immune issues can make you more susceptible, and, then things like rough sex, that causes micro tears, or having other infections like BV or thrush and things can be co-factors, I guess is the word, but, they can make you more vulnerable to an STI. What are the risk factors that we should be aware of? Hey, Babe Towns. So sorry to interrupt, but I simply had to pop my head into the lounge here and mention another virtual lounge that you've got to get around. It's the Labia Lounge Facebook group that I've created for listeners of the potty to mingle in. And there you'll find extra bits and bobs like freebies or discounts for offerings from guests who've been interviewed on the podcast, inspiring and thought-provoking conversations, and support from a community of labial legends. I also have an account on the fab new app Sunroom, which is a platform created by women for women and non-binary folk, and where there's no shadow banning or censorship of sex-positive content, unlike with the other platforms that I'm on. So you can hit up my Sunroom for extra content and real and raw life updates, because I'll be sharing on there from now on all of the stuff that I can't post anywhere else. My vision for both of these is that they become really supportive, educational, and hilarious resources for you to have more access to me and a safe space to ask questions that you can't ask anywhere else. So head over to the links in the show notes and I'll hopefully see you in there. And now, back to the episode.
So multiple partners is going to be one of the biggest risk factors for an STI. Also, not using condoms. One of the biggest, most important things to know is that condoms do not protect you from everything, and that some of these conditions are spread via skin-to-skin contact. And so condoms cover, a penis and can protect maybe the internal part of the vaginal canal, but the external, the vulva and the base of the penis are not going to be covered by condoms. Therefore, those are still at risk for passing skin-to-skin infections. So condoms will help reduce your risk. And then really just minimizing the number of sexual partners or having safer sex practices. That being said, minimizing the number of sexual partners is also relative in that, ensuring that you're having regular testing will help reduce your risk. And it's not realistic that we are necessarily reducing the number of partners that we have, but being, having a screening process, having some questions that you ask, making sure that you're getting their test results, your test results, all of that will help reduce your risk.
Yeah, totally. I definitely have had some moments of oh my God, what about, with my journey with HPV and just looking back and going, fuck, there was a few years there in my early 20s where I had the Implanon in. So, hadn't really clocked onto the damage that hormonal birth control can do. And I just was oh yeah, fuck it. I can't get pregnant. I can do whatever. I have this freedom, but then it meant that I wasn't being as safe and had lots of sexual partners. Also dabbled in the poly world as well. And, there's been moments where I've been fuck, I kind of regret that a bit, because I think I put myself at such a higher risk, and have obviously wound up with HPV. I mean, it's the most common, everyone's got HPV, basically. It's not a big deal.
Yep. Yeah. I think they say 80% of sexually active women will have HPV in their lifetime. I remember I got it when I was in my early 20s, and I didn't get one strand. I got 4 strands at once.
Oh, wow.
And so, yeah, And I remember when I got it, I did not understand that it was a sexually transmitted infection and how that is actually passed on. And there's a lot of misinformation about HPV, I think, out there in the world. Did you feel like that when you got that diagnosis?
Yeah, totally. It was, it's been an interesting journey, and I'm very glad there are resources like Danelle's book about cervical dysplasia and healing that naturally, and Women's Bodies, Women's Wisdom by Christiane Northrup. I think that was the first book I read, a big section in there about HPV, and I was like, oh, whoa, okay, it's actually really common and also very common that we heal that naturally ourselves if our immune system's up to scratch, and it just sort of like it sorts itself out, and it doesn't necessarily have to be this big scary thing that's like a death sentence and like, oh, you're definitely going to get cervical cancer and you better have your part of your cervix removed. Like, it doesn't have to be this big scary doom and gloom thing. And I think like reading those books and starting to actually research myself and find empowering information was like a big game changer for me. So I don't feel that rising sense of panic or like failure as a woman for like not protecting my body or whatever. Like, it's just, it's very manageable. Yeah.
And I think that's a really good point to bring up, is that when you have an STI, it's a part of life. It's a risk that you take when having sexual intercourse, period. It doesn't make you nasty. It doesn't make you dirty. It doesn't make you irresponsible. It doesn't make you a slut. It's that you had sex. There's lots of people who get an STI the first time that they have sex. There are other people where that's maybe not the case and they never get an STI. But at the end of the day, it's a risk that you take, and it doesn't mean anything about you as an individual.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. That's really important because it is like so stigmatized. I think there's a lot of like shame and embarrassment around it, but it's so normal and it doesn't mean anything about you. Like, so, surrounding the shame and the embarrassment that we're feeling, I think we're also then up against this like if we're engaging, like say we're having a fun time, we're out and about, we're hooking up, we're dating, we want to be having sex with multiple people. Like I know a lot of people find it very hard to, approach a new sexual partner, or like if they're going to have a one night stand or something and be like, okay, so, can I please see your STI panel? Like, when did you last get your bloods tested? Like, have you been checked? It can be a conversation that a lot of people find really awkward and confronting. And most women I've spoken to, and me in the past, up until a certain point, like I, just preferred to like forego that conversation and just wing it and try to, like hope for the best, because, we wanted to avoid looking like a loser or sounding like like a dork or something, because we were being overly careful, and it wasn't a sexy topic to bring up. It wasn't like a, like a flowy, organic, like, oh yeah, so hot and heavy, hang on a sec, like, when did you have your dick checked last? Like, how do we approach that conversation?
Yeah. And I love that you brought this up, because I was totally winging it for a lot of my life too. And I was winging it until I got herpes. And so now it's changed for me in that I have to have those conversations, and I choose to have those conversations with my partners to make sure that they are informed on their decision. And so I winged it for a lot of my life. It happens. And having those tough conversations can be really awkward, can be really uncomfortable. However, the more you do it and the more practice you get, the easier it gets. And I would think of these conversations as a way to really open up the door for deeper communication about sex and intimacy and what you really like. One of my favorite methods to use is the STARS method. Have you heard of that one before?
No.
So the STARS method, it's STARS. So S stands for sexual health status. So what is your sexual health status? When is the last time both of you got tested? Are you positive for anything? How many partners have you had since the last time you've been tested? T is turn ons. So anything that really turns you on. What do you really like in the bedroom? A is avoid. So anything that you want to avoid, that you don't like. R is going to be relationship intentions. So is this just a one night stand? Are we monogamous, exclusive? What are we doing? And then the final one is S, or safer sex practices. So are we using condoms? Are we not? What does that look like? And how are we protecting ourselves? And I think that this conversation, for me, I always put the sexual health status at the end, because if our relationship intentions don't meet up, there's no point in me disclosing my herpes status, because we're not going to be having sex. We're not going to be intimate. But this conversation can really help have the conversation without it being so cringeworthy, without it being so like, when was your last test? And the best time to have this conversation is going to be before being intimate with somebody, before being in the bedroom, because when you're in the bedroom and you're all sexy and it's the heat of the moment, stopping to have that conversation can be even more difficult. So I encourage you to do it prior to getting into the bedroom, but it happens. And even if you are in bed next to somebody, you can still go through these really fast and get all the information that you need so that you can feel comfortable with your decision too.
Yeah, amazing. It's a really tricky one because I think there's a lot of insecurity that goes on already, especially if we're meeting a new person and it's going to get intimate and it's a bit of a vulnerable space, or maybe we're, already feeling a bit nervous or there's performance anxiety or whatever. And I kind of keep hearing time and time again, oh, no way would I bring that up on a one night stand. What's the point? It would be really weird and awkward, and then they wouldn't want to have sex with me, or it would ruin the mood. And I'm like, babe, if you're not mature enough to fucking have these conversations, and if the partner that you're about to let a part of their body inside you, or let, in that intimate space with you, isn't able to meet you in the middle and be mature enough to have that convo with you and answer some questions, or be happy to discuss it, then do not fuck them. What are you doing? I think it needs to be more normalized, and we all need to get better at practicing this and having those skills. It's it all comes back to communication skills and self-esteem and confidence, which it's a very rife area, sexuality and hookup culture and stuff. It's very tricky, but can you even imagine if the whole culture around that changed and it was actually expected and normal to talk about this before we took our clothes off? Holy shit, what a game changer. So I just would like to level the fuck up with this, and just if you can't have those conversations, you probably shouldn't be having sex,
Absolutely. And if you think about it, if you're not having these conversations, but you're talking about sex, when you start talking about sex, or you're sexting somebody, you're planning a one night stand, and you start getting hot and heavy when you're talking with them, that's a great time to have the conversation. And having those conversations will help you have much better sex, because it's not just about the safer sex practices, the STI status. It's about talking about how, especially as women, how do we want to be touched? Do we like it fast? Do we like it slow? Do we like to be kissed? Do we like this? Do we like that? Do we find kissing too intimate during sex when we're hooking up with somebody? I know a lot of women who feel that way. And so these conversations are really a tool for making it better for you and making that experience better for you, even if it is a one night stand. And that being said, do you want to have sex with somebody who is not capable of having these kinds of conversations?
Totally. It's it's almost, it's pretty old fashioned expression, but it sort of separates the men from the boys, or, the wheat from the chaff, because if they're going to be turned off by that, they're obviously not mature enough, and they don't have, your best interests at heart. And I feel like the right person will actually be so impressed if you bring it up. They'll be really grateful that you provided an opportunity to have that conversation. They'll be like, oh, wow. And then that will foster better communication in the future, more trust, more rapport, a sense of safety. And all of those things are important to feeling especially present and juicy and enjoying pleasure when it comes to sex and intimacy. Those are all essential factors if you're going to be having a really nourishing, rewarding time, and not just being boned and kind of slightly worried that you might catch something or you might get pregnant, or it sort of serves a lot of purposes. You get that information, but you also develop this kind of relationship where it's already okay to talk about these things that might be normally a bit uncomfortable. Like there's enough trust there. There's enough mutual respect. And I just think like there's nothing to lose. And like the things that people are worried about, like, oh, I'll look like a loser, or they'll think this about me, or maybe they won't want to sleep with me anymore. It's like, cool. Like if any of those things went down, then like fuck that person. You do not want to be sleeping with them anyway. So like kind of a dickhead filter.
Yeah. And I found like for me with my my herpes status, my HSV, that when I disclose, it really tells a lot about a person's character. And if they immediately like go and have negative feelings towards me, that's not somebody that I want to even date anyways. That's not somebody that I would want to be intimate with, versus somebody else who's like, okay, I want to learn more, or maybe they already know about it or understand what it is and how to protect themselves and all of that. But it's a really great screening tool when you are dating somebody to have these conversations and help you really narrow down, like, do you really want to spend time with somebody who doesn't respect you and value you enough to share this information?
Yeah.
And also, I found that when I disclose personally, that so many men, that's who I sleep with are men, find that they have a deeper appreciation for my vulnerability to share that information, and they feel more connected because I am the one that's usually bringing that conversation up. And so when you bring these conversations up, the right people that you should be sleeping with, I use loosely, but the right people are going to welcome that with open arms and really be more connected to you, and the experience is going to be much better.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it reminds me of an interview I did with the Yoni nutritionist about herpes, and she was saying like, holy shit, like the feeling you get when you disclose your herpes status and the other person just receives it really, really well. Like she just kind of had this experience with a guy and he was like, oh, is that all? Oh, whatever. And just like jumped on her, and she was like, oh my God, it was so fucking hot. Because yeah, just that like level of acceptance and receiving that information well is very healing and very connecting, I'd imagine. So yeah, very cool. So it's time for the segment Get Pregnant and Die.
Don't have sex, because you will get pregnant and die. Don't have sex in the missionary position. Don't have sex standing up. Just don't do it. Promise?
Do you have a anecdote or story about how your sex ed failed you, what you would have liked to have learned more about? What do you got?
Oh my goodness, that is so great. So I would say that my sex education failed me in that two ways. One of which is that I didn't really understand that I should be enjoying pleasure with sex. And for years of my life, I felt like my body was for my partner's pleasure and I was here to please them. And I had no clue that I should be enjoying it, and that I didn't even know what the hell I wanted or what should feel good for me. So I think that would be the first way that it failed me. But it also failed me in that our definition of sex is so narrow that we a lot of times are taught. And sex includes so much more than just penetration.
Yeah. Yeah. Great answer. Oh, all right. So I've got a few more questions about STIs. We spoke about the consequences of leaving mycoplasma untreated. What about like, your sort of garden variety clap or gonorrhea or syphilis, or like what are the consequences of leaving them untreated? So like, especially just to encourage people to get tested regularly, even if they don't have any obvious symptoms. Yeah, what can happen? Excuse the interruption, my loves, but I'm shamelessly seeking reviews and 5-star ratings for the potty because, as I'm sure you've noticed by now, it's pretty fab. And the more people who get to hear it, the more people it can help. Reviews and ratings help me curry favor with the algorithmic gods and get suggested to other listeners to check out. Plus, they make me feel really good and appreciated as I continue to pour my heart and soul into creating this baby for you. And I promise I don't mazz over them or anything. I mostly just tuck them away for a rainy day when I'm filled with self-doubt and existential dread about being self-employed, which is fairly frequently. So you see, leaving a review really does make a difference, and it's an easy little act of support that you can take in just a minute or two by either going to Spotify and leaving 5 stars for the show or writing a written review and leaving 5 stars over on Apple Podcasts. Choose your poison, or if you're a real overachiever, you could do both. Whoa now. If you are writing a review though, just be sure to only use G-rated words because despite the fact that this is a podcast about sexuality, words like sex can be censored and your review won't actually show up. Lame. Anyway, what was that? Oh, you're going to go do it right now while I wait. Okay. Yeah. No, that's a great idea. May as well just quickly click that 5-star button before we get on with it and, forget about it and get on with your day. I'm hearing them roll in. I'm hearing those 5 stars. Oh my God, I make myself cringe. Anyway, thank you muchly. You're a total gem, and I'll let you get back to the episode now.
Yeah, so gonorrhea and chlamydia both can lead to pelvic inflammatory disease, just like marcoplasm. And that can result in fevers, infectious symptoms, ultimately. So fevers, pain with intercourse, all of that, and can make you very sick. When you look at HIV, if it is left undiagnosed and untreated, it can turn into AIDS. And AIDS is something that can result in ultimately death if untreated and unmanaged. When you look at syphilis can result in a large variety of complications if it is untreated. And with syphilis, this one in particular is really hard to know if you had because you typically will have a painless sore initially, and it lasts for about a month, and then it'll disappear, and that's it. And unless you're tested, you would never know that you had it. And if the sore is internally, you're definitely probably not going to know it's there because it's painless because you can't see it. And so syphilis can affect your brain. It can start showing up on like your palms and your soles. You might notice a rash and potentially result in death as well.
Whoa. Yeah, syphilis is a bit of a wild one, isn't it? That can just sort of be in you for 50 years and then you go crazy, eh?
And boom. Yep, exactly. Is it kind of coming back in Australia the same way that it is here in the US?
Ooh, I'm not actually sure. I don't think I have my finger on the pulse with all of that stuff, but is it having a bit of a resurgence, is it, over there?
It is. Yeah, major surge here in the States. And I have had the opportunity as a clinician to actually see cases of this. And it used to be something where you never would see a case. And some of the communities that I've worked in, significant rise, like 80% rise, I believe, is one of the statistics that I had seen over the last handful of years. So it's definitely coming back. So making sure that you're getting tested is really important.
Why do you think that is? What sort of causes the conditions for it to just start really spreading like that out of the blue?
So I think it's comes down to lack of education, lack of testing. And potentially even like people when they get tested may not want to do the blood work. And since this is only diagnosed via blood, it can be easily missed if you're only wanting to do the urine or the swab. And so making sure that you do get the blood in addition to that. I think that's one reason. I think the other reason is that, our lifestyle practices have changed over the last years and that we're not as monogamous. Monogamish. We don't practice as much monogamy as we used to.
Yeah.
And there's a lot more hookup culture. There's polyamory, a variety of different lifestyles that are more actively participated in, I think, now than there was 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And also, I could just maybe be now more exposed to it than at that point, too. So it's hard to say if that's really true or not.
Yeah, totally. So interesting. I'm going to ask my my doc next time I go in, and I'm going to be getting way more thorough testing. I mean, I definitely haven't ever been tested for a lot of the things you've listed. I think I've had blood work done once, but I think it was just to test for herpes, and they probably didn't. I mean, I'm not sure. Maybe they would just automatically test for syphilis and other things, but like I didn't ask for it, so they probably didn't, right?
You never know. You never know. And more than likely, they didn't. If you don't know, I would assume that it didn't happen.
Yeah, wow. Okay. Well, I'm going to be taking myself off to go get a very thorough testing panel done. Oh, fun. Yeah, it's so interesting because you just sort of get complacent. And if you've had, a few tests done and then I've been in a monogamous relationship for like ages, so I just don't even think about it. But yeah, my partner had never been tested for anything before. And I guess it just makes you realize that, you can't get complacent about it. It really is important, just especially for peace of mind. Now that I know what I know, thanks to you.
Well, yeah, I actually have my test kit coming to my mailbox here in the next couple of days because we can do at home testing. And the last time I was tested was back in like October. And for like the last couple of months, I'm like, I need to do it. And I've just been putting it off. But for what? Like, knowledge is power. And if you know the information, you can easily be treated or managed and potentially prevent complications long term if you're taking care of yourself. But it does get really easy and it's scary. Like, do you want to do the test and find something out? No, it's scary. I get that. But if you have that information, you're so much more empowered.
Yeah, totally. Do you feel like it's kind of more stigmatized when a woman has an STI than when a man does? Like maybe it's just been in my experience and like, my circles growing up like in a pretty bogan country town or something like that. But I kind of got the vibe that it was way like, it was seen as like not okay and way more embarrassing and shameful if a woman had an STI. Whereas a man, it was like, yeah, player.
I would agree that that was kind of how it was perceived growing up for me as well, that a woman is a slut if she gets an STI, where a man, it was like, good job, you got around ultimately, and you're celebrating the broness, right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, so interesting. Cop it again, women. So like, what would you say to people who are feeling gross or feeling ashamed, feeling like really letting that get to them because they've contracted an STI? Like, I know we've sort of reassured them a little bit how normal it is and that they're not a slut, but like, do you have any words for people that are feeling a bit of shame and a bit of like, oh my God, I'm gross,
Yeah, I think that the biggest thing is really, for me, what helped was resources. So podcasts, one of my favorite podcasts was Something Positive for Positive People, which is primarily herpes related, but they do talk about other STIs, and finding these different resources and these communities to reassure myself that, hey, there are other people that have this. It happens. It's a risk of sex. But also, it was a lot of reprogramming for me and working with a coach and understanding that I am not my infection and it means nothing about me. But I had to reprogram all those societal norms that I was taught. And society tells us these things, starting at a young age. And I had to reprogram that. And so I would encourage, if you're struggling with it, find resources, find community, but then also work with a coach, work with somebody to help you reprogram these beliefs that you had.
Yeah, totally. Beautiful. Thanks for that. So, like, what have I missed? I'm just thinking what else might be useful to cover. Is there anything that I haven't asked or that we haven't covered that you'd like to share or talk about that would be really valuable to listeners? Because obviously I don't know what I don't know, and it's becoming clearer to me that I don't know that much about this topic, and you're in the industry. So, with like hands-on experience. So, like, what is there anything else that we've missed that you'd like to talk about?
Yeah, I think the one other thing to really add is that ejaculation doesn't have to occur for some of these STIs to be transmitted. And so a lot of times we think, oh, well, they didn't come in me. That doesn't mean that you cannot get an STI. And especially when you look at the skin to skin ones. So just so the listeners know, when we look at infections that are spread via skin to skin, that's going to be herpes, HSV, HPV, and syphilis. Those are the 3 common ones that are going to be spread via skin to skin. But I think really knowing that, like, hey, condoms reduce your risk, but they are not 100%. And condoms do also break. And you also want to make sure that you're using them the whole time, because ejaculation does not have to occur for some of the infections to be transmitted.
Yeah. Yeah, really important. What about, it just popped into my head, what about genital warts? Are they considered an STI, or is it a kind of different thing? Like, that's skin to skin, right?
Yes, those are going to be skin to skin, and those are a type of HPV.
Oh, that's right. I did know that. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, no, that's a great question, though. And so those are something that can be passed as well.
Yeah. All right. So I'd love to do a TMI story with you.
TMI, we love it. Said TMI, we love it.
Do you have anything that would be like a bit too taboo or a little bit too much for public convo, or at least considered as such?
Well, nothing in my world is TMI, so it's always hard to narrow that down because I have no filter and I pretty much talk about everything. I think something that happened recently that I'll share a little bit of a story on, because I think a lot of women can relate to this, is I use a flex disc. I use a disc for my menstrual flow. Are you familiar with those?
Yeah.
So they tell you to boil them after use. Do you actually boil them? I know that I usually don't boil them after use. And so this last menstrual cycle, I was like, you know what? I'm going to boil this thing because it's been a few cycles and I haven't boiled it. I've been washing it with hot water. That should do the trick, right? I boiled this thing. I have never seen so much nasty crud that came out from this disc, and I don't even know where it was. I think it was just adhered to the disc, but you couldn't even see it. And I learned my lesson. Boil your cups and discs after each menstrual cycle.
No shit. I'm so lazy. I totally thought hot water and like maybe a bit of soap or vinegar would do the trick.
Yeah, so did I. So did I. It does not. From that, based on that experience, I was very like, oh, wow, okay.
Okay. Whoa. All right. That is good to know. Everybody go boil it. Send me a photo if you get some like weird floaty action going on like Jordan did. That's really
I should have took a
interesting.
photo.
Yeah. Where was it hiding? Like, those things are so sleek and silicone-y. Like, you'd think you'd be able to see it if there was a whole bunch of like bacteria and crud hiding out. Whoa, bit scary.
Yeah, I have no idea. I think I have a dark gray one. And so I think that you can't really see when there's a film on it. And so the boiling of it released all of that I didn't even know or couldn't visibly see that was there.
Wow. Okay. Good to know. That's a really good one. No one's ever shared a TMI story like that before. Love that. Hey, me again. If you'd like to support the potty and you've already given it 5 stars on whatever platform you're listening on, I want to mention that you can buy some really dope merch from the website and get yourself a Labia Lounge tote, tee, togs. Yep, you heard that right. I even have Labia Lounge bathers. Or a cute fanny pack if that'd blow your hair back. So if fashion isn't your passion, though, you can donate to my Buy Me a Coffee donation page, which is actually called Buy Me a Soy Chai Latte, because I'll be the first to admit I'm a bit of a Melbourne cafe tosser like that. And yes, that is my coffee order. You can do a once-off donation or an ongoing membership and sponsor me for as little as 3 fat ones a month. And I also have a Sunroom profile over on the Sunroom app, as I've mentioned. And I also offer one-on-one coaching and online courses that'll help you level up your sex life and relationship with yourself and others in a really big way. So every bit helps because it ain't cheap to put out a sweet podcast into the world every week out of my own pocket. So I will be undyingly grateful if you support me and my biz financially in any of these ways. And if you like, I'll even give you a mental BJ with my mind from the lounge itself. Saucy. I'll pop the links in the show notes. Thank you. Later. All right. Well, I think that's a wrap. I feel like I'm missing something. I just feel like I wanted to ask so many more things, but I think we covered it really succinctly. So thank you so much for that.
You're so welcome.
Yeah. Did you have, I know you were maybe going to offer a little discount or freebie or something from your work for the listeners. Did you have anything you wanted to do a little plug about?
Yes. So I have a couple of things. One of which is I have a program called Get the Sex You Desire, and you can learn more about your body and discover your body so that you start having better sex. A lot of us, I think, don't really know that our sex is mediocre until you discover what is good. But on top of that, we don't really know, or we've been suppressing what actually feels good for us and what we really want. And so this program will help you discover what that is for you. If that's something that you're interested in, you can check it out on my website, or you can send me a DM over on Instagram. At my Instagram is Jordan Donnell, JordanDannelle. And then the podcast, you can always check out Vaginas, Vulvas, and Vibrators as well.
Beautiful. I'm looking forward to coming onto your podcast soon.
Yes, I know. I can't wait to have you. There was one other thing that I did want to add as far as STIs. We talked about how a lot of them are symptomatic or asymptomatic or no symptoms. But if you do notice any changes with your genitals, that's a good clue to go in. So if you're having any pain, new discharge, new odor, anything that just doesn't feel right, that's a good indicator to go get tested, go see your provider to get that looked at as well.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, cool. And I'll link that list that sort of prepares people to go in and be equipped with that for their doctors as well. So yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much, Jordan. It's been a pleasure.
Yes, thank you for having me.
All right, everyone. Bye-bye. And that's it, darling hearts. Thank you for stopping by the Labia Lounge. Your bum groove in the couch will be right where you left it, just waiting for you to sink back in for some more double L action next time. And in the meantime, if you'd be a dear and subscribe, share this episode, or leave a review on iTunes, then you can pat yourself on the snatch, because that, my dear, is a downright act of sex-positive feminist activism. And you'd be supporting my vision to educate, empower, demystify, and destigmatize with this here podcast. Also, I'm always open to feedback, topic ideas that you'd love to hear covered, or guest suggestions. So feel free to get in touch via my website at freyagraph.com, or say hey over on Insta. My handle is Freya_graph_YMT, and I seriously hope you're following me on there, because damn, we have fun. We have fun. Anyway, later labial legends. I'll see you next time.